Hi, I'm Coach Mick, and in today's quick tip, we're going to talk about the first of four in a series of doubles responsibilities. And the first player we're going to talk about today is the server. Now, the server obviously is one of the most important positions in doubles because if we lose our serve, that means we have to break serve twice. So it's going to be very important for us to keep the advantage if we can while serving. Now, for starters, the server is going to want to stand somewhere near halfway between the center mark and the double sideline. I personally like to make sure I mix it up a little bit just to throw my opponents off. One thing I've always done is sometimes I'll get up to the line and start to serve, and then I'll stop and I'll correct myself and maybe move out wider just to get my opponents thinking I'm going to serve the ball wide and then still serve it up the tee. Or I may be starting out a little bit wider than normal, and right before I'm about to serve, I'll hesitate and stop, move more towards the center mark to get my opponent thinking I'm going to serve toward the tee and then serve the ball wide. And those are some mental tricks you can play with the returner, but basically start in between the center mark and the double sideline, but it's good to mix it up just a little bit. Now, the first thing you want to do with the server or as a server is to communicate with your partner where the serve is going to go. And your partner can signal that. You can talk to each other in between points, but it's very important. And this is one of the most important things that I see missed in recreational and even adult team tennis is that the partner and the server don't communicate. So now, number one, the server might know where they're going to serve it, but the server's partner doesn't know. And it's so important as the server's partner that you know where the server is going to hit the ball. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But by communicating with your partner, the server actually becomes more aware of what you can and can't do. For example, if you communicate serve up the tee and then serve wide and you're going back and forth, and you may notice that, boy, my up the tee serve isn't that good today. And in a pressure situation, that's going to be important to know what you can and can't do. And so you can hit a different serve rather than up the tee, but hopefully one that'll still put your opponent in a defensive position. Also, when you communicate with your partner where to hit the serve, it gets you more in tune with what your opponent's weaknesses are. So when you serve up the tee and you realize, wow, they're really nailing that backhand today, but wide for some reason, they're just not hitting that forehand. It keeps you more in tune with what the returners can and can't do. And that's very important, again, in pressure situations. Now, also, when you communicate with your partner where you're going to serve it, your partner can now decide before the serve is even hit where to move, number one. And then number two, if that all pans out, where to hit their first shot if the shot comes back to them. Like, for example, let's say you tell your partner or your partner tells you, one or the other, that the serve's going to go wide and you hit the serve wide. Great serve. But now you've opened up what part of the court? Well, you've opened up the middle. And so that's one of the easiest shots in doubles to hit, and that's one of the shots that the pros use time and time again, hitting between the two players. So if I am the server's partner and we have communicated that the serve is going to go wide, I can pre-plan out where my shot's going to go if it's hit back to me. And by doing that, that gives us a huge advantage. All right, and it's the same thing for the server as well. If you know your serve's going to go wide, you know your partner's going to move to cover that, you're going to know where you need to move after you serve to put yourself in the proper position to bisect that angle return, let's say if you're hitting it wide or up the tee serve. So very important to communicate, and that's probably the number one most missed tip when it comes to servers' responsibilities that I see out there in the tennis court in recreational and adult league tennis. Now, the second thing that the server has to do is just get your first serve in. And usually a good number for that is 70% of the time. But very important, at least 70%. You need to be above that if you can. And if you can't get your first serve in 70% of the time, especially in doubles, it's okay to slow that down because A, it's going to give you more time to get to the net if you're a serve and volleyer. And B, it's going to keep your opponents in more of a defensive position. We'll talk about that in a minute. But getting your first serve in is very important. Number one, like we said, your opponent is in more of a defensive position when they're receiving serve off your first serve. Usually their mindset is going to be something like, okay, let's just get this back cross court away from the server's partner, don't miss it, block it back if I have to, lob it up if I have to. But as soon as you miss that first serve, they go from a defensive or neutral position to more of an offensive position, more like, okay, let's attack this serve. Maybe I can attack the net person and go up the line, but now they feel much more confident. And tennis, as we know, is very mental. And so it's very important that you can keep your opponent in more of a defensive or at least neutral mindset rather than an offensive mindset. And you can do that by getting your first serve in. All right, now, where you hit that serve is also important as well. You want to serve on the deuce side. You definitely want to serve up the tee if you're playing a right-hander because, number one, it's usually the opponent's backhand, but more importantly, it cuts off the angle for your opponent. And when it cuts off the angles for your opponent, that's going to set up your partner more to pick off the return. And I spent 2 weeks one year sitting with a clipboard watching what happens when the serve went up the tee and what happens when the serve went wide with a variety of different levels. And when the serve was served wide, the server's partner touched the return 29% of the time. So that's not bad. That's 1 out of 3. That's not bad at all. But when the serve was served up the tee, the server's partner touched the return 62% of the time. So twice as much. So if you can get that ball on your partner's racket at the net, it's going to be a huge advantage for you. And I would say by serving up the tee, for sure, that's going to happen more often. The other way that's going to happen more often, and a lot of times this happens on the ad side, is just to make sure you serve to a weakness. Usually when you serve up the tee to a right-hander, anyway, on the ad side, you're serving to a strength, all right, and they're a little bit more confident. A lot of times you may pick out that weakness to their backhand or right at them. Any way that you can get the ball on your partner's racket, that's what you want to try to do as the server. So it cuts off the angles, number one, very important. Puts the ball on your partner's racket more by doing so. All right, now the third thing you're going to want to concentrate on here is look to hit a serve that will allow you to get within 3 to 4 feet of the service line for your first volley. So you're coming to the net, and you want to make sure you're coming to the net. The teams that get to the net first win a much higher percentage of the points. And if you can serve the ball and put your opponent in a defensive position and get control of the net, that's going to make you and your partner much more successful when it comes to winning points. And that's what we're looking to do, obviously, in doubles. Now, the next thing you want to do after you make that first shot is to make your second shot. All right, second shot is very important. So after you make your serve and you make that first shot, you have to make your second shot. And we've done statistics that when you get your first 2 shots in, you win 70 to 75% of the points. Very important. So if I get my serve in and then we get our next shot in, we're going to win a much higher percentage of the points by doing so, by getting our first 2 shots in. Now, as a server, if you decide to stay back, which I hope that you don't, what you have to do is concentrate on now just I'm not going to miss. You can't miss as the baseline player. When we keep track and take statistics of when the point ends on a volley, is it won or lost on that volley, usually about 80 to 85% of the time it's won because the last shot was a volley. But when the last shot is a ground stroke, it's only won 10 to 15% of the time. So what's that telling you? It's telling you that the ground stroker is losing all the points. But you may be the other person and say, well, I'm not losing the points. I'm just getting the ball back. So if you do decide to stay back, just don't miss. And remember our back-to-back theory. If I'm the back person, make sure I'm getting the ball to the other back person. And you do that by either lobbing over the net person or just hitting cross court away from the net person. Well, that's today's quick tip, and I hope you learned something about the server's responsibilities. And the next time you get out there, think about, number one, communicating with your partner, very, very important. And also getting that first serve in more often. Very important if you want to be successful as the serving team. Now, for more tips and instruction, you can go to realtennisnetwork.com.